strike me down, just let me go, let's blow this town. I am the needle, I am the damage done. My body's barely hanging on, but my spirit's dying dead and gone. And one more time and tomorrow's just ain't here. And maybe sometimes we are done with the past, but the past ain't done with us. I'm not ready to lay myself down to die. I'm not ready to lay these bones of this bottle out to dry. I'm not ready to sell my soul just quite yet. But I must admit I'm getting close to it. Down, down, down river I go, faster and harder. Down, down, down I go. Down, 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 down I go. Down I go.
Thank you, guys. You guys are too kind.
Good morning. For those of you who don't know, my name is Reverend Linda Brewer, and thank you for being here. Our topic today is called Thanks for the Memories, and you all have given me lots of wonderful ones. So the theme for the whole month is memories. At the beginning of the month, Reverend Donald shared that memories are neutral, and we are at choice about how we remember things. The second week, he shared that since we chose the memory in the first place, by choosing differently, we can change our memories. But how do you do that? I did a bit of research this week and discovered that memories are most powerful when we attach a story to the event. In fact, one study said that unless we create a story, we don't remember anything. But all stories do not create the same results. We are the storytellers, and we get to choose what kind of story we want to tell. We can choose memories that we can be thankful for, or memories that diminish our joy. One way of looking at this is that there are 3 types of stories that influence the memories we create. Once we recognize how the 3 types differ, we are better able to consciously choose the memories that we create. So let's look at those 3 types of stories so we can serve memories that we're thankful for. So the first type of story is basically a factual account of the visible or provable events. It is the news story, the who, what, where, when. For those of you old enough to remember, it's the Dragnet version, just the facts. We can generally agree about this type of story because it's verifiable. If we had a videotape of a situation, we could all agree on what we see while watching it. So if we played a video of a man speaking in an animated fashion, we could agree that his face is red and he's waving his arms and he's talking very loudly. Now, the second type of story goes beyond what we can factually prove and see because it includes our personal interpretation. What we, the witness or the storyteller, perceives about what we see. It includes editorial or opinion. So with 2 people watching that same videotape, one person's story might be that man looks angry, while the other might say, that man looks really excited. These 2 types of stories are our narrative of the events filtered through our frame of reference. And because our filter is unique and subjective, whether we want to admit it or not, in most ways, this type of story is fantasy or fiction. It is made up by us based on our life experiences and the content of our subconscious mind. The third type of story is the recognition of the metaphysical truth beneath the events. The awareness that there's a deeper meaning of the experience when seen from a larger perspective. It acknowledges the activity of spirit in the events for a higher purpose. It recognizes a level of transcendent reality that neither the facts nor the fantasy comprehend. Of our red-faced man, arm-waving, loud-speaking guy, the third story might be that he's having an opportunity to break out of an old way of being if he chooses to say yes. So we have three types of stories: fact, fantasy, and truth with a capital T. If you're one of those people that prefers big words, you can call them objective, subjective, and transcendent. But I'm going to stick to the little words. So to illustrate the difference in the three types of stories, ask yourself, what is our weather today? The facts might be that it's partly cloudy, a bit windy. The temperature's around 63 degrees with an expected high in the mid-70s, which is approaching normal for this time of the year. And I know that because Sterling Paulson and his team share this information with us. These are the facts. And Sterling wouldn't lie to us. Look at how many times he gets it right about the weather prediction, and people get an umbrella. If you don't watch Channel 2, you don't know what I'm talking about. So the subjective story about the weather depends on our perspective. I had an unexpected dental appointment on Thursday, and as I sat in the chair looking out at the dark sky, both the dentist and his assistant shared how much they love thunder, which was happening. And I share that story. I like the sound of thunder also. But when it was pouring rain when my appointment ended and I had no umbrella, I started to create a different story about the weather. Now, the third type of story, or the truth, is that we are always at choice of how we respond to what is. We can choose to be okay with the now moment, or we can judge it and make it wrong, thus making ourselves unhappy with this and reverting back to our fiction. We can accept the facts, or we can resist them. We can choose action, or we can choose to be victims. Now, I chose to ask someone to show me another way out of that building that got me out closer to my car. And so I only had to walk a little bit in the pouring rain, and I got to my time just in time to see this gorgeous bolt of lightning illuminating the dark, cloudy sky. And I left it. I was at choice, and that's the truth. So as I go on today, and on and on and on, I invite you to bring to mind a memory that you are not thankful for, and to set the intention to use the tools I describe to transform that memory for yourself. It may be something recent that happened, or something from long, long ago that you haven't been able to release. Something that still interferes with you experiencing love as your reality, whether in general or with a specific person. It might be something that's very personal, or something that's growing out of the divide that seems rampant in our country today that people like to stay upset about. And so as we go on, I want you to let yourself experience your story, how it manifests in each of the three ways. And if anyone out there doesn't have one, I want to invite you to come up here and finish the talk, and I want to go out there and learn from you. So does anyone want to take me up on that? Okay. So, because stories help us remember, I want to use a recent experience from my own life to illustrate the three types of story. So the focus of this story I'm telling today took place on October 14th last year. But I'm going to give you a little background first. I was on vacation that week from work, which meant I was able to take part in the service. and I was scheduled to do the announcements. And I was really excited about that because I missed being with my spiritual family when I was working every Sunday at the hospital. And the announcements were always a fun change of pace for me from the illness and death that I spent my days doing at work. Another background piece is that I had had some recent drama in my job where I was accused of things I had not done and was feeling disrespected, misunderstood, hurt, and vulnerable. And on top of that, I was kind of angry because a couple people who are higher up than I was had emailed me about it during my vacation, which I had scheduled months before and which I rarely took. So that's the background. Now for my 3 stories. The factual story began at 8:14 that October 14th, when, having just gotten up, I got a call from Kurt, who was scheduled to speak that day, telling me he had been throwing up all night and that I would have to give the talk at the service that started 2 hours and 16 minutes later. I found a talk I had given 7 years earlier, quickly updated it, and gave the talk. I had already been including in my announcements that we were moving out of our Bogatti location in 17 days to a place that was at that time unknown. So this old talk that I had called Winds of Change seemed to be really appropriate. And during that talk, I shared with you all how I had loved my former life back in North Carolina, where I was a counselor. But back then, I had gone to a church workshop where the speaker said, just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're supposed to do it forever. And I had burst into tears, wondered where that was coming from, and subsequently told God that if she wanted me to be doing something else, to send stone tablets with her wishes, because I loved my life. I also shared my belief that God is always whispering to us, calling us to what is ours to do, that if we don't listen, God shouts, and that if we really, really don't listen, God hits us with a cosmic 2x4 when we don't pay attention. So that is my first story, a collection of facts that can be documented. They are documented, they can be verified. In fact, I looked up the time of the phone call so I could tell you the fact of that. And the words I repeated are on YouTube, so you can watch it if you don't believe me. They're not right or wrong, they're not good or bad. Those are just the facts of what happened. And they're observable, they're provable. You'll notice that first stories are usually relatively small. Our stories get big when we move to the next type, our fiction about what happened. It's really tough to stick to the facts. Most of us want to move right away to our fiction, interpreting the facts, attributing motive to others, and declaring what the facts really mean. Let me illustrate how these types of stories work. Melvin took his new hunting dog on its first hunt. He shot a duck, which fell into the lake. His dog walked on the water, picked up the duck, walked back, and laid it at Melvin's feet. Melvin was kind of blown away, so he shot another duck. And again, the dog walked on the water, picked up the duck, and brought it back. Now, at this point, Melvin was feeling just a little bit nuts, and he wanted a reality check. So he invited his neighbor Sam to go hunting with him the next day. And sure enough, every time one of them shot a duck, the dog would walk out on the water, pick up the duck, and bring it back. And Sam said nothing. And finally, Melvin couldn't stand anymore, and he blurted out, "Haven't you noticed anything strange about my new dog?" And Sam thought about it for a minute, and he said, "Well, now that you mention it, yes, I do. Your dumb dog can't swim." So fiction stories are a matter of the storyteller's interpretation. One man's miracle of a dog that walks on water is another man's commitment to limited and negative thinking. The dog can't swim. So my fiction about the events of October 14th includes hanging up from Kurt, telling myself there was no way I could pull that off, and being quite out of sorts that God was asking this of me when I was already so stressed about work, which I assure you had a much larger story too that I won't share with you. Luckily, I didn't have a whole lot of time to indulge in that story because I had to finish the talk, be dressed, and drive from home and get here in just a little bit over 2 hours. So my editorial about that morning includes all of you also appearing to be very gracious and so kind in receiving me that I have insanely let Donald talk me into doing this again, more than once. And that's crazy because my story is that I don't know how to do this, and this is not part of my calling. When we are deep in our fictions, the facts are not as important as our feelings. It's our interpretation of what's going on that determines how we feel. And often at the same time that we are telling our fiction about something, others are telling their fiction about the very same situation. And they are quite often very different stories. Their stories may include them interpreting our actions and what we've done. We might think that if they just knew the facts, that they would understand that our story is true and that theirs is just a misunderstanding based on their lack of information. But the bottom line is that all type 2 stories are fiction, fantasy, opinion. And as long as we operate by telling those kinds of stories, we stay caught up in our fantasy and our fiction, and we create drama. Because drama based on our fantasies is what stories are all about. In his book Illusions, Richard Bach says, "Argue for your limitations, and sure enough, they're yours." The reality is that we get to keep our stories in the limitations and unpleasant memories they create as long as we want to claim them. As long as we embellish the simple facts with our fiction and stay emotionally invested in claiming that as real. And when we do that, we keep ourselves from getting to the significant story, the third story, the spiritual truth contained in the events that could transform our lives. Consider the Bible. What kind of a story is it? How much of it is type 1, verifiable fact? And how much of it is type 2, the storyteller's interpretations about what they witnessed? Personally, I don't care very much whether the account of creation or the flood or Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead are historically verifiable. What I care about is the third story. What spiritual truth does it bring to my life today? How can I use the principles that the creation story illustrates to create good in my life? How can I use the story of the flood to wash away beliefs and perceptions that no longer serve me? How can I die to old ways of being and be raised into a more conscious life? That's what the third type of stories are all about. The spiritual truth, the principles beneath the facts and fantasies. And so my truth about the events of October 14th are these. As I was sharing with you the story of ignoring what Spirit was saying to me back in North Carolina and the resulting dramas that followed when I failed to heed God's whispers or shouts, I realized that everything that was happening that day, Kurt getting sick, thank you for that, my having to step in at the last minute, was all for me. As those words literally came out of my mouth and I heard them out loud, I realized that despite the fact that I loved my ministry at the hospital, and I really thought I would do it until I dropped dead, that God had been whispering that she had other things in store for me, and I was not listening. I realized that the drama at work was a very loud shout, and I could ignore it at my own peril. I could wait for the cosmic 2x4, maybe some extreme health event, or getting fired, or I could listen to the shout that was calling me to another ministry, one that is just now beginning to clarify itself after the wonderful advance this weekend. Thank you. I went home that afternoon, and after some prayer and reflection, and a call to Wendy Condi to try to get her to talk me out of it, which she failed miserably at doing, I stepped out in faith and sent my boss my letter of resignation that afternoon. I retired from the Huntsman on January 2nd. In that moment of clarity standing in front of you, I knew, not as theory, but with spiritual certainty, that I am responsible for my life experience. That spiritual principle, the law of God, is always working, and that there are no exceptions. Now, if you're anything like me, I confess that I have sometimes felt offended in the past when someone up here made that kind of a simplistic statement about thoughts being creative. I think I thought that they were saying that if I change my thoughts, the facts themselves would change. And often that doesn't happen. I now understand that our philosophy, that what it teaches is not about the fact at all. Sometimes the facts of the situation change when our thinking changes, and probably more often they don't. The body may be cured, or the illness or injury may persist. What changes absolutely when we change our thinking is how we interpret the facts and what we create as fiction and the memories that go with it. Stuff still happens, but our filter on reality changes with our spiritual intention to change it. It is so very simple, but it's usually not easy. That is in part because we have a subconscious mind that is not always operating on the same agenda as our conscious mind. And how do we know that? Because too often what shows up in our lives is not what we consciously say we want, right? Right. Thank you. And the law always works. So if our life does not reflect our conscious thoughts, it must be reflecting our subconscious, our hidden thoughts. And how do we know what our subconscious believes? We look at our life. Whatever shows up in our lives, especially those things that show up over and over and over again, are feedback about how our unexplored beliefs are creating our world. It's not right or wrong, good or bad. It's just feedback. The fiction that I made up that October morning was feedback that at some level I was using my power against myself instead of for myself. I was using spiritual law to make myself a victim. Poor me. Kurt trusted me enough to hand me the sacred privilege of standing up here and sharing myself with you. Poor me. Someone at work thought bad thoughts about me that weren't based on the objective facts, but filtered through their fiction. My truth story is that Kurt got sick. Someone at work made a judgment without even talking to me about my side of the story, so that I could hear that God had other plans for me. I'm just starting to have a glimpse of what those are, and I am not really a person, for those of you who know me, who's comfortable living in the mystery. But in my 44 years of ministry, if there's one thing I've learned, is that we are regularly called to do just that, to live in the mystery. If we choose to live our lives following the guidance of Spirit, it will often call us to walk into what looks like total darkness, walking in the little bit of light we have and trusting that as we move forward on the path, that somehow we will have enough light not to fall off a cliff. Or trusting also that if we do fall off that cliff, we will either be given wings to fly or a parachute to soften the landing. In truth stories, our lives are not good or bad, right or wrong, they're just feedback. And what life is always feeding back to us is that the law of God, spiritual principle, is always working. Whatever we choose, we will create. The trick is we can choose consciously, using our spiritual truth, or we can choose unconsciously, using our facts and fantasies to keep us stuck in a life that we don't love. It's up to each one of us. I was a medical chaplain for 14 years, the last 7.5 in a cancer hospital. And I struggled with what got said here. I struggled to believe that somehow that precious 24-year-old dying of cancer chose that. But I also know that we're like gnats on a TV screen. We only see the dots of the pixels. We don't see the picture. But there is a big picture, and Spirit knows what it is. And I have watched cancer patients who feel abandoned by the God of their understanding, who is a God that rewards good and punishes evil, because they lived good lives, and their prayer has not cured their cancer. And I've had patients tell me that cancer is the best thing that ever happened to them. And I'm talking about terminal patients who are dying of their cancer. And they say that because it helped them to stop and take stock of their lives and to realize what matters. I've watched people die alienated from their loved ones because of some old fiction sticking to all of them. And I've seen many more who came to reconciliation with loved ones and saw their impending death as a great gift that brought them healing even though they didn't get a physical cure. We really don't get to choose the facts. But we get to choose the story we tell about the facts and thus the memories that we create. And we for sure get to choose whether we seek and find the spiritual truth available in all of life's experience, if we're willing to go beyond our fantasies and our fictions. It's up to you. Right now, bring to mind that upset I asked you to remember. What do you choose? Will you choose consciously or unconsciously? Will you choose from a place of judgment and blame, negativity and limited thinking? Will you see a dumb dog that can't swim? Or will you choose from love, from joy, from spiritual wisdom? I believe that that's what we all really want, or we wouldn't be here this morning. We'd just be out playing somewhere or sleeping in, catching up on Netflix. I believe that we each go through our lives doing the best we know how to do, and when we know better, we do better. One way we learn to know better is by choosing the stories we tell, so we can love the memories we create. When we're willing to move beyond the facts, and especially beyond the negative fantasies, and choose instead the deeper truths, we transform ourselves and the world. You are the author and the editor of your life. What type of memories do you choose to create? My prayer is that you will choose well, so that you can genuinely say about all you encounter, thanks for the memories. Thank you. In the beginning, God. That creative, loving spirit brought out of itself all that is. The mountains, the oceans, the sky and the earth, the flowers, the birds, the trees, each unique, each an expression of that divine. And that creation continues. That spirit continues to create and chose to take form and express itself as each person here. And we are one with that spirit. That creative energy, that love, that wisdom, that peace, that joy, all the things that God is are ours. When we're willing to let go of our fiction, our facts, and just know the truth. And so right now, I invite you to come forward and allow a practitioner to know the truth for you, as the rest of us wait in the silence. And as these words have been spoken, we release them into the law, which does the work. The spiritual truth that we recognize and know that these things are already done. And as I know this, my heart is filled with gratitude. And we release it all as together we say, and so it is.